basically, Pub Poets is a group that meets at the Old Town Hall, usually the first Sunday of the month. We do have a couple of changes in dates. And we meet at 5:30 until 8. What date's the next event?
March 1st.
March 1st.
March 1st, Sunday, March 1st.
So rather than sort of telling you about us, we thought we'd interview each other and get a little bit more about the group out that way. So I'm going to start.
Oh dear.
It's alright, I actually haven't picked on you, which I regret because I feel like I should have done, because I feel like you might have picked on me.
Yes,
so what do you think the defining feature of the Pub Poets events and sort of the style of poetry that's coming out is at the moment?
At the moment, the style is brilliant. At the last two events, the standard of poetry has been so incredibly high, it's blown me away. At the last event, the humour that was there just floored me. But there were poets who, at one moment you were hearing something that had you in hysterics with laughter, the next moment there was something there that actually had you close to tears. So it's a really broad, eclectic mix, and the focus seems to be on quality.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. There's been some amazing stuff out, hasn't there?
Incredible stuff, yeah.
Obviously, talking about style of poetry, we had a question on the Facebook page. I've sort of rephrased it because it sounded like a bit of a telling off. But the sort of poetry that you read is sort of simultaneously conventional in sort of some of the forms that you use. You play with a lot of traditional forms, but you also inject quite a lot of unconventional.
You mean swear words?
Touchy humour. Yeah, the swear words, maybe veering off down the end of slightly bluish tinged poetry.
I will be sharing one of those later as well. Yeah, it's one of those things that I do it to help people. I do it selflessly. Me personally, I think that the rude words are offensive, and I don't like rude words at all. But I think if I'm bold enough to stand there and say the occasional rude word or touch on a mature theme, in that case, other poets might feel empowered to come along and experiment with the form. Does that sound credible?
No, I think it sounds quite realistic, because we are starting to see some of that. Obviously, people coming out with some very brash and brave poetry, aren't they?
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I've got one I will be reading later that's not one of mine. It's a brilliant. I'm jealous that it's not one of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what was the quote off the night? She out-ashed Ash.
yeah, and she did, yes, yeah. That was an incredible piece.
In real style, yeah, no. I mean, the actual question out of that was actually, where do you get the brass balls from?
Hereditary, yeah.
Hereditary brass balls.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got them from my son, yes.
Right, okay. Upward inheritance.
Yes.
So, lastly from me, mine was, what's the highlight been so far, like the one thing that you've really sort of just sat back and gone wrong?
The numbers, that's been the highlight for me. The fact that on the first night, when it opened on January 4th or 6th?
I actually wanted to say 3rd, I can't remember, but
first Sunday in January,
yeah.
When the majority of people you would think were still thinking, oh, I've got Monday work coming tomorrow, Christmas, I'm just fed up with. But we had about 35 to 40 people turn up on that first night. The second one, we had about 45 people turn up. The numbers of people that turned out to show the support for it, thank you all. The number of people that turned out to share their quality material, those have been the highlights for me.
Yeah, no, again, I really do agree with you there, because even the fact we had a full lineup of people for the open mic, people came prepared with a lot of material.
Yeah. That
was worth them coming with. It wasn't by any means a quick job written on the back of the bus ticket on the way. It was some real good poetry.
Some excellent ones, yeah.
Well, I guess I'm going to let you ask your question.
That's kind of painless, right?
Yeah.
What's 2 seconds?
Okay, so I have to be victimised by you now.
I'm afraid so, yeah. And I've got a couple of questions here, and I'm thinking. First question, and it's got 2 parts to it. Why is poetry important to you?
That's a really good question.
Thank you. Really good question, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know whether the answer is. Poetry was a new thing, because obviously I started doing a degree with writing associated to it 2 years ago. Prior to that, the writing experience that I'd actually been working towards journalism. So, I mean, to quote the advice that I read in the papers once, to be a journalist, you don't have to be a good writer, you just have to be able to know how to tell a story. You basically have to get a lot of information across without many words, which never seemed like a transferable skill to poetry until I started doing it. And then you realise you're actually trying to get across this sort of concentrated essence of something in almost as few words as possible, because you can't write a book about it. It's a poem that's got to be quite immediate and it's got to be very vivid. And I started doing that and still felt a bit flaky to begin with. And I don't know.
Terminology
Yeah, flaky and uncomfortable and never always sure with the term poet as applying to myself, up until the point where you realise that really what poetry is sort of, you're not a poet, poetry is something that you do, and it's something that you take part in, and I think it's quite a natural thing. Once you can adopt it, it actually just becomes something that you need to do. So I don't know if it's important in the sense that I think, oh, I've got to write a poem today. It's more that you wake up and think, I've got to write this down right now, and it just happens after that.
Second part of that question, do you think that your Merseyside heritage has influenced you with this appreciation of poetry?
Probably massively, actually. I mean, I grew up with my dad who loves the Beatles, and obviously lyrically, they don't actually use a lot of words, but they manage to get across so many different emotions with quite simplistic language. And you know, when you're surrounded by that music, and then there's also the aspect of being from Liverpool. Most of us have Irish people in our family, and there's that culture of storytelling that comes through with an Irish background. So, I mean, I've grown up where I know all my family's stories from way back, and ghost stories and sea stories of my granddads, and you know, such a sort of rich family history that you get passed on, that you then sit there and think, well, how do I tell it to make it interesting? And it becomes a fascination then with how you tell stories that will intrigue other people, not necessarily just your own bloodline who already know about your family, you know.
But how you enjoy your storytelling.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Final question. We'll learn this one.
Right.
What's the difference between a good poem and a bad poem?
Do you know what? I've been trying to write a poem about this for about 8 months, and trying to nail it is very difficult. But what I think it is it's called the Santa Claus effect, and it's like, while Santa Claus is something that is totally believable, and every sort of fibre in your essence is going on, you believe that story wholeheartedly. The minute things become unconvincing, the minute people around you sort of don't believe it, the faith starts dissipating. I think that's when it becomes very obvious as to whether or not you believe in Santa Claus. I don't really want to say. And then I felt like watching some poets, and also some comedians as well. If you feel like you don't believe what they're doing, you don't believe in their poetry either, and you sort of lose that faith. And the moment that you lose that spark of interest, I think it becomes a difficult poem to associate with. So I don't know whether it's good poetry or bad poetry, but I think there's poetry that speaks to you, and there's poetry that really doesn't, because someone's maybe trying to be a bit too pretentious or too much something.
I know what you mean, yeah. That's almost as though a good poem or a bad poem is influenced by the audience, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I think poetry is not a one-sided thing, it's communication. And you're communicating with a group of people, and if you have a skill for communicating with people and you have a way of bringing them on board, they don't necessarily have to agree with you, they just have to understand your point of view and respect that. And if you have a way of delivering that brings those emotions about, then great. If you alienate your audience, and I'm not talking in disagreeing, if you incite a passion, that's great. if you make them disagree or disassociate themselves from what you're doing and they're bored a couple of minutes in, then I think that's probably the bit where you're less likely to call it a good poem.
I did that a while back, yeah. I ripped a couple of poems out which probably weren't quite right for the audience.
Yeah, I think you need to read your audience.
Yeah, that was an experience. Thank you for those, yeah.
Oh, thank you for your questions. They were pleasantly difficult. Thank you.
These are a couple of extracts from Brian Patton's prose poem towards a definition of itself. 1. When in public, poetry should take off its clothes and wave to the nearest person in sight. It should be seen in the company of thieves and lovers rather than that of journalists and publishers. On citing mathematicians, it should unhook the algebra from their minds and replace it with poetry. On citing poets, it should unhook poetry from their minds and replace it with algebra. It should fall in love with children and woo them with fairy tales. It should wait on the landing for 2 years for its mates to come home, then go outside and find them all dead. Poetry should be seen lying by the side of road accidents, hissing from unlit gas rings. It should scrawl the nymphomaniac's secret on her teacher's blackboard, offer her a worm, saying, "Inside this is a tiny apple." Poetry should play hopscotch in the 6 p.m. streets and look for jinx in other people's dustbins. At dawn, it should leave the bedroom and catch the first bus home to its wife. At dusk, it should chat up a girl nobody wants. It should be seen standing on the ledge of a skyscraper on a bridge with a brick tied round its heart. It is the monster hiding in a child's dark room. It is the scar on a beautiful man's face. It is the last blade of grass being picked from the city park. Brian Patton, prose poem toward a definition of itself.
When I was 7, I wanted a G.I. Joe and a Mighty Max toy because they were cooler than Polly Pockets and Sydney's. When I was 9, I wanted to be an archaeologist, hunting for DNA thieving bugs encased in gold and amber. When I was 11, I wanted to climb volcanoes, chase hurricanes, and discover cures for diseases I'd never heard of. When I was 13, I wanted to be the pretty girl whose looks would complement a studious, hard-working yet frivolous nature. When I was 15, I wanted to disappear, melt into the surroundings and not be that girl anymore. When I was 17, I wanted to leave home, to escape the belief that no one saw or cared about the pain. When I was 19, I stopped hoping. When I was 21, I cried, not because I was happy, but because I was shocked. I never thought I'd make it that far. When I was 23, I settled for a man, following golden promises etched in pyrite, not believing I was worthy. I was wrong. When I was 25, I came home, realising the world had never been against me. I'd just let it turn me down without a proper fight. When I was 27, I started a new path, the fruits of which became a talismanic source of strength and boundless faith. When I was 29, aimless searching ceased as my soul laid its hat and made a home. And now I trust and live and breathe like pain had never held me back, feeling more vital than ever I can recall, hills and troughs now smoothing into a clear path, resuscitating dusty recollections of hope and how to find it.
A sonnet to the charity backpackers in supermarkets. I do not need a hand with my packing, especially a hand that's one of yours. In personal hygiene, you are lacking. Your fading smile is tinged with herpes sores. I watched you wipe your nose upon your cuff. I've seen you cough up phlegm into your fist. If you think that I'll let you touch my stuff, the chances are you're really fucking pissed. I don't care if it is for a good cause. I don't care if you're doing a good deed. The air around you's infested with spores. I hear Ebola can make one's ass bleed. I'd rather lick up shit from garden worms than run the risk of picking up your germs. This poem from Lisa Hollamby was read out on the February 1st event. It's called Bacardi Baby. Blind drunk on Bacardi, my arse in the breeze, tripped over a tramp and scraped both of my knees. Tipped half a kebab and sauce down my tits. Who plays erotic? It spoke to your bits. Your dick came on over, you followed behind. Then followed me home, 'cause hell, you're not blind. Messed up the bed sheets with chili and blood, and I vaguely recall I thought it was good. You snored while I puked, you're a right heavy sleeper, but MacD's for brekkie, that made you a keeper. We shacked up together about 3 weeks later, in spite of your ex, oh God, how I hate her. Watched TV together, we had kinky sex, got each other's names tattooed on our necks. You hate condoms, the pill's complicated, I got knocked up, you got agitated. While I stopped drinking shots and switched to silk cut, you asked whose it was and you called me a slut. 9 months later, a baby that left me with stitches and a chuff like a tunnel, those nurses were bitches. You said you weren't daddy and wasn't that fun, got paternity tested on ITV1. I said that the kid wasn't yours just to spite you. It sleeps, eats, sucks tits, the kid is just like you. I always work late, I don't mean to sound bitter, but it's such a cliche, you were shagging the sitter. You pissed me right off, I had to be mean, so I called up the cops, 'cause the girl was 14. My perfect revenge plan that just couldn't fail, and it didn't, my darling, that's why you're in jail. I said not to cheat, and you should have obeyed, but look on the bright side, you're still getting laid.
50 Shades of Friendship. The beats inside the club become too much. The fire builds in my throat, a burning acid rising up. You take my hand, suggest a taxi home, fresh air, relief. The smooth rhythmic thrumming of the taxi on the prom, I fall asleep. Waking, we're at yours, not mine, and you suggest a glass of wine. Well, I'm far too stoic a drinker to say no. So I'm barefoot in your kitchen, and you're handing me a glass, and you're standing much too close, and your aftershave is overwhelming. Any closer and I'll spill my... Oops. But you're not bothered by the splash of cold liquid that's made your white t-shirt see-through, and muscles firm, and... When did that happen? Things have changed since we were 15, and your intentions weren't to carry on the merriment, but to push forward to some main event. All right, I'll bite. Not too hard. Well, maybe. I'm laughing at my unspoken joke as you lead me up some stairs that seem too steep. I'm feeling sort of childish following my friend in such a way. I'm not sure where this game's going to end. As seductions go, it's really not too bad, but you are the sort of brother I never had, and seeing Spidey posters on the wall and seeing photos back when we were all much, much younger, it throws me off kilter. And blabbering, thanks to shots of Jaeger, I've lost my verbal filter. I'm starting to apologise, but you silence me. Almost. Stopping me talking was never an easy job. But for a second, I'm aloof. I do my utmost. And fail. Miserably, in fact. As you plant me in the kisser with a kiss. Now we're swirling, falling in the dark into twisted, unfamiliar sheets, chasing the spark that leaves burning trails across room-chilled skin. Suddenly you're up. I catch my breath and watch your shoulders flex as you pull something out from under your bed. Unsure what's going on, the gentle boozy spinning rocks my head as I marvel at the bold advances of a shy old friend. I pay too little attention as you unbend, retrieving a duffel bag, taking out the contents one by one. Chin on the floor, the gaming mood is gone. Masking tape, blindfold, robe. I'm shocked to find the gentleman so bold and filthy. It's always the quiet ones, I say, laughing too shrilly, hoping overconfidence hides my nerves while you're tying my hands behind my back with my own scarf. You lean in close, pressing hard against my hips, holding masking tape now firmly on my lips, and whisper, "Don't you fucking know it?"
This was actually the first poem that I read out at People Poets. It's called Old People Sex. Granny pulled on her surgical stockings. She put her false teeth in the glass. She took the tenner pad out of her panties and said, "Grandpa, could you please put my ass?" I got horny last month at the bingo when I called house on A69. It's been decades since I've taken one hard up to chuff, and you ought to be there this time. I got horny last week at the library whilst reading An Old People's Friend. I saw an advert for polyester trousers, and it made my arse want your knob end. I got horny tonight in the kitchen as I tuned in to Woman's Hour. I could hear the rain dripping on my cat flap, and I thought, let's try a golden shower. So I'm here and I'm hot and I'm horny and my teeth are in the steric glass. I slipped Viagra into your Horlicks, so please do me now, up the ass. Oh, Grandpa, he did try to please her, as she lay there with her legs spread wide. He gave her a cuddle and a bit of a kiss, and then teased her piles to one side. But poor Grandpa was having a problem. Her desires had caught him off guard. He rubbed and he tugged and he yanked and he pulled, but the old man's old man wasn't hard. He imagined doing all three Beverly sisters, trying to coax some life to his dick. He imagined doing Margaret Thatcher, but that made him feel a bit sick. And Grandma was looking impatient as she lay there consumed in her lust. He considered her bare flesh and liver spots, and her famine, or grey curls of dust. It was true he still found her exciting. She'd take out both sets of false teeth to please. And whilst it sounds sick, he'd swear by his dick, wrist jobs improve with Parkinson's disease. But he stood there and looked rather sheepish. He said, "I'm sorry, I've just been with another. I thought that you knew when I put her to bed. I always have a quick chat with your mother."